everyone, and welcome to the QuitCast. My name is Becca, and I am an author success coach. I tend to make content specifically for authors who are looking for advice, but this specific time, like this episode, my goal is to talk about those of us who like to give advice, especially if you've watched this podcast, watched this YouTube channel, listened to the podcast. If you've heard my content a lot, you know that I talk about questioning the premise, which I assert fairly often. The question the premise is not for people who are giving advice. Question the premise is for people who are taking advice. Because if I hear someone say something, I can't control what people say. People are going to say what they're going to say. Unless we are literally jailing you for saying it, you're allowed to say it, even if it gives you feedback, right? Like you're allowed to say it. So I am not in control of who is allowed to say what they're allowed to say. So here's the thing. If you are not the person who gets to control that, then you have to know how to listen to other people's advice. And in writing, what this looks like is, why is someone saying this? Why are they giving me this particular advice? Or why do they have that particular perspective? It really is just a why asking, but it's a deep why asking. So question the premise is about not just why do I think they are, but also why do they think they are? What is going on in their brain that's making them say this? Because if I can understand and contextualize that, then I know how to treat them and how to respond to them without assuming that somehow like they're being malicious or whatever, because I know that I make the joke about the productivity industrial complex and about productivity bros and productivity and all that stuff. And yeah, there is some of that I think is unhelpful for an awful lot of writers, but there are writers who are helped by that. And so if I was going to talk to writers who were giving advice, and not necessarily people who have podcasts or anything like that, but individual writers who are giving advice or trying to help their friends solve the problem that they're coming to them with. So when I hear someone, the first things I need to understand from I'm giving the advice is, why are they coming to me with this advice? What a lot of people think is that they know why they're coming to me because they're telling me why. But most people don't actually know what's going on subconsciously in their head. So I'll give you an example. Someone can't write, like they've been stuck in their writing. And they would say, why am I not writing? They would say, because I'm lazy or stupid or whatever. And they've been trained over years and years to think that. But ultimately, we don't find that that's actually the case. We find that there are reasons why people get stuck, and some of them are super beneficial. And so the why is not accessible to them in that moment. And again, this is what all of our other videos are about. But in this specific instance, what I want to talk about is when they hear your advice, or when you give them advice, is it actually going to fix what's going on internally? Because this is the essential pain of being human. Most of the time, we cannot access what's actually happening for them in real time. Like we are seeing effects of things that have been years in the making, sometimes decades and centuries and, centuries and centuries and millennia in the making. Like we are not necessarily dealing with the behavior on the surface, and we think we're dealing with the behavior on the surface. So again, let's go to the writing example. My friend is stuck. And they say, oh my gosh, Becca, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. And so I tell them what I've done, because it's helped me. And so I'm trying to be helpful. And I say, oh my gosh, do this, do this, do this. And what happens, where we see this actually happen, is that when it works so well, right? It just like clicks for them and something really, really works. When it doesn't work, usually they will keep trying to do that thing, or they'll try to do something similar over and over, trying to help that happen. So again, I'll give you a different example. I feel unorganized. I feel like my time is extremely chaotic and I don't know how to get done the things that I want to get done. What's the first piece of advice we usually reach for? Hey, here's a planner. Here's a system of planning. Here is a way to get around that feeling, because either it's worked for me, or it worked for my friend, or it worked for this person who teaches it, or it's worked for other people who've been taught by that person. Because again, like everything, systems work for a number of people. And when they don't work for people, you either customize the pieces that work for you and leave it if you're a certain type of personality, or you keep trying to utilize the system until you have to give up because you're frustrated. So if you understand from the beginning when you're giving advice, and I'm so excited to see some of the teachers out there in the writing world doing this, like literally saying from stage, which is the only thing they can do, saying from stage, this might not work for you. And if it doesn't, discard it and move on to something else, right? Like they're being as helpful as they're capable of being, because they can't tell you why it's not working, right? That's not their job. Their job is to teach the thing they're teaching. Like that is what they're excellent at. Let them teach that thing. But when they say, this might not work for you, that is literally the easiest thing we can do when we're giving advice. Because when the person who's listening to us, like the person who's having the problem is listening to us, we need to make sure that we do that moment of like, ooh, I don't know, like, okay, so this is what worked for me and it might not work for you. And then when they try it, it's like they haven't heard it with the level of certainty. And it's the certainty that's the problem, because it is the 100% certainty that I know exactly what your problem is and no one else knows. And this is the tactic that you need to execute. And that's just all there is to say about it, right? The way we biologically respond to certainty is that we are trained biologically, not by any person or system or anything. We are biologically trained to respond to certainty as though it is equated with correctness. So when we hear someone being very certain, and thankfully, that is happening less as we get farther away from like the moment that deconstruction started. So that's excellent. But the problem is that it still takes us a lot of time to deconstruct all of that stuff internally, where we need to understand when someone says this may not work for you, that we're at least doing what we can, right? Like when we give advice, we're doing what we can. So that's the first thing. The completely lowest hanging fruit that we can do. And thankfully, almost everyone tries to go above and beyond that now. I feel like it's becoming more part of the culture, which I'm glad for, is this might not work for you. Here's what worked for me, right? Like that kind of advice giving. The other piece about it, though, is, again, let's go back to the person who's actually having the problem. Most of us, and again, not all, but if you are emotionally conscious at all, and if you have any emotional intelligence, and if you care about the person who's asking you the question, you actually want to make them feel good in that moment. Like not necessarily that that's your conscious process, but what you're trying to do is help them. You want to solve their problem. You want to get them past this thing, right? So there can be also this urgency in like, okay, let's solve the problem. Like, let's tackle it. Let's go after it. Let's do this thing. But sometimes what we find with writers with certain problems is that what they need the most is to not have that frustration solved by another person, right? Like it's not to go find this tactic or this process or this program that's going to solve the problem. It's that I need to be okay sitting in that moment, letting my brain push itself to fix the problem, and then utilizing the tactics that work for me. And again, that's just one example, but there are so many ways in which our intuitive processes, the things that we would naturally do without really consciously thinking about it, are guiding us towards our best success patterns. And we're short-circuiting them. Again, the we is the non-advice givers, it's the advice receivers. We're short-circuiting them because we want so badly to not feel that essential pain. And my goal when I do the QTP, right, is to say like, what is the essential pain we have to accept? And what is the essential pain we can change? Like, let's parse those things apart. And every single one of my QTP videos is ultimately trying to do that. Are there things we just have to accept? The world is this way. Nothing's going to change. And then are there things we can change? And let's look for those things, right? And that's my specialty. It's why we do the Clifton Strengths work. It's why we do alignment instead of like literally, it's literally why we do everything we do. So when I'm giving advice and I'm hoping to try to solve their problem, what I also want to do is be really cautious about whether I'm creating more problems than I'm solving, right? So it might I be the person who's like, hey, let me check back in and see how that worked. And then if it isn't working, instead of me assuming that it should work, and this is so important, instead of me assuming, oh, but that should work. It works for all smart people. Oh, that should work. It works for everyone that I know. Oh, that should work. Blah, blah, blah. Right. Like, we have to be quick to deconstruct in our own minds the expectation that problems are solved by tactics instead of problems solved by alignment, like by the right application. So essentially, it's more like the medical field, right? Where there is a lot of different things that could be wrong. There's a diagnostic process. You have to go through the entire diagnostic process before you figure out what's wrong. And again, I'm not suggesting that everyone needs to become an expert in how to diagnose issues in this. What I am saying is you need to be willing to admit to yourself and to other people that when people aren't having success with the tactic that was successful for you, it doesn't mean you're bad or wrong. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. And B, it doesn't mean that they are bad or wrong. It literally means the fit is off. So we have to catch ourselves making those justifications and force ourselves to say, it's okay if it didn't work for you. Let me maybe try to find somebody else who can help you with that. Or again, like, let them do, what they're going to do. That's fine. But the third piece of advice giving, and this is the most important thing that we can learn, period. There is a painful learning curve that happens in our brains when we realize that we were wrong about something. And from experience, both studying neurobiology, psychology, like all of those things, but also in my experience in being wrong as well. And my experience of coaching other people through the process of being wrong about something. We have to be so careful about how quickly we move into fight or flight mode and into defense mode, right? In terms of, I need to be on guard with myself about why when someone else is suggesting that I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing, I need to be cautious about immediately going to the defense place and then stopping listening and stopping learning and stopping growing essentially and developing, and instead being defensive and sticking to where I'm at and not being willing to change something, right? Like, I get that many of us are low adaptability, many of us are low strategic. It is hard to change sometimes, but here's what I want us to do. I would love it. And I'll give you the example of something like planners. Planners don't work for everybody. And I don't mean that planners don't work and therefore people are going to be unproductive. That's not what I mean. What I mean is people are productive without planners. People are focused without goals. People accomplish things without intending to accomplish them. There are all of those patterns that are possible. And that's just one example, right? This I'm wrong example, literally you can apply it everywhere, both in writing advice and outside in the world itself. When I'm giving someone what I think is the truth, and I'm saying, this is the thing that you have to do this, you have to do this, and I'm wrong about that, my very first instinct is to get angry and get defensive or be hurt, right? And get defensive. So one of those two things, that's a natural biological occurrence. It's a self-protection mechanism. It's fine. It's not a bad thing. But what we have to do in those instances is we have to be willing to deconstruct the ways in which we are getting defensive about our own opinions and to say instead, it's not necessary. It's not necessary for everyone to hold the same opinion about this being true if it's not true. So there are myriad examples I could give from the writing, but the reason that I use the planners in particular is because we have so much clear evidence that this isn't the case. It is not the case. that everyone is successful with planning or with setting goals or with being strategic. It is not the case that everyone has to do that. So if that's the case, what I want to be cautious of is I want to be careful of hearing Becca say, you shouldn't be strategic. You shouldn't plan. You shouldn't focus. If it's working for you, you are doing it right. You should keep doing it that way. But if it's not working for someone else, then our goal of questioning the premise is to say, let's not have them follow that advice though. Like it's not the best thing for them. So let's let them do something else. And then I need to be willing to deconstruct and disconnect the thing that is making me get defensive, the thing that is making me want to double down and want to push harder and want to try to convince them. And I have to be willing to deconstruct that and let them do what they are going to do, even if I think that it's wrong. And as you start to question the premise of your own advice giving, you will get better and better over time, at being wrong, at allowing yourself to do things differently from other people, at not needing to know that how everyone is doing and oversee how they're doing. It will get easier. And the reason that I do this is because we really need to be cautious when we are the people who believe that we're right about something, that our rightness is not equal to it being right for everyone. And we have to be willing to release that part of our defensiveness and be willing to listen and have empathy for that person and hope that they actually do get their problem solved, because that's the ultimate goal. So I just want to thank all of you for being here on the QuitCast today. We're probably going to talk about this more in the future, but I did just want to land here in this one spot. If all you do is the first part, that's okay. This learning how to allow people to be the way that they are is a process, and we have to go from one step to the next in order to get all the way through all of that process. So if all you do is say, this may not work for you, it may work for me, but it may not work for you, that's a great first step. Let's start there. And then from there, we'll keep moving, and we'll do more content about this in the future. But I just want to thank you all so much for being here. My name is Becca. And again, we'll see you on the next QuitCast. Bye, everybody.